Some confessions aren't whispered over candlelight, but spoken in the middle of a storm, with rain pounding on a rusted roof and the telegraph ticking like a restless heartbeat. Some men would trade 10 herds of cattle just to sit in silence beside a woman who's lost everything. Today, I'm going to tell you a story, not just of love, but of secrets, redemption, and the quiet courage between a grieving widow and the drifter who was never meant to stay. So don't look away, because in just a few minutes, you'll understand why one night in Dry Creek was worth a lifetime of running. And if stories like this speak to something deep in you, smoke, the sorrow, and wild-hearted love, then hit that subscribe button. Because every time the wind howls westward, you'll be right here when the next tale begins. The wind howled like a banshee across the empty Colorado plains, bending the trees and lashing rain against the buildings of Dry Creek. It was spring in name only. March brought storms here that rattled the bones and soaked the soul. Lightning clawed the sky in jagged bursts, illuminating the lone telegraph office that sat at the end of Main Street, its windows flickering with candlelight. Inside, Maribelle Knox tightened her oilskin coat and stepped back, out into the storm. The wire had snapped again. Somewhere beyond the stables, the tension had failed, and without it, Dry Creek was blind to the rest of the world. She couldn't allow that. She slogged through ankle-deep mud, gripping her wire spools and tools. Rain stung her cheeks like tiny needles, her bonnet soaked through in minutes. The pole at the edge of the creek bank had lost its insulator cap, and the line hung limp to feed it. She steadied the ladder, checking it twice, then began to climb boot by boot, her fingers numb but practiced. She had done this more times than she could count since her husband died. Lightning cracked overhead so close it lit the pole in a ghostly white sheen. Her heart thundered, but her hands kept working until the sound of a horse's whinny behind her made her stop cold. A rider appeared from the storm like a phantom-drenched hat, low over his face, coat dripping, boots nearly swallowed in the mud. He dismounted slowly, his horse trembling under him. "You're going to get yourself killed up there," the stranger called through the rain, his voice gravelly but steady. Maribelle didn't descend. She narrowed her eyes against the downpour. "Then best not get in my way." The man didn't laugh. Instead, he stepped closer, keeping his hands visible, non-threatening. "Ma'am, I'm Dave Ramsey. Telegraph company sent me from the Cheyenne line. Heard your relay's been unstable since last freeze. They said you might need help." Maribelle hesitated. The company had sent word of scheduled maintenance, but she hadn't expected it during a storm like this, or from a man who looked more like a bounty hunter than a lineman. She climbed down slowly, boots splashing into the mud, eyes sharp. "You have papers." He reached into his coat, carefully pulling out a sealed leather pouch. Inside, a folded contract bore the Pacific Telegraph seal. "Official. Real." She gave a curt nod. "Then you climb. I'll hold the ladder and guide. If you slip, don't expect me to catch you." They worked in silence. Dave moved with practiced efficiency, securing the cap and realigning the line. He didn't ask unnecessary questions, didn't fumble or show off. The connection resumed with a steady tap back at the station. When it was done, Maribelle allowed herself the briefest exhale of relief. "You'll want to stable that horse," she said. "Barn's out back. There's hay and a cot if you need it. But I don't open my home to strangers." Dave gave her a long look. It wasn't resentful, more like he understood why she had to say it. "I won't ask for more than that," he said. "Thank you, ma'am." She watched him lead the horse away, boots squelching in the mud, the lantern he carried casting long, flickering shadows. Still, something about his presence left a quiet tension in the air, like a string pulled just taut enough to hum. That night, Maribelle sat by the telegraph unit, the tap-tap of distant messages returning. She transcribed them automatically, noting the usual traffic Denver dispatches, Cheyenne supply ruins, weather alerts. The town was asleep, cloaked in storm. She paused to stretch, brushing a loose strand of damp hair from her cheek. A sharp tapping caught her ear, not from her key, from the barn. She stood slowly, frowning. Morse code came as naturally to her as breathing. She'd learned it from her late husband, Sheriff Knox, years before he took a bullet in the back, on a job gone wrong. Tap, 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 pause, tap, tap, tap. She tilted her head. The rhythm was too clean. Not nervous fidgeting, not a random sound. Dave Ramsey was keying out a message from the barn, and it wasn't going through her system. Her pulse quickened. She rose silently, moving to the back door, cracking it just wide enough to hear more clearly. The storm had softened to drizzle, and between the wind and crickets, the pattern continued. Her ears strained to catch the full message. From the barn's faint lantern light, she spotted it, a compact Morse tapper, portable, battery-powered, the kind used by military scouts or federal agents in the field. It was wired into a side branch she hadn't finished integrating into the main switchboard. Dave had found it, rigged it, and was using it. Arrived Dry Creek. Contact established. Package uncertain. Monitoring host. Package. Her stomach twisted. What was he sending, and to whom? She closed the door gently and backed away from the wood, her mind racing, thoughting. Dave Ramsey had shown up out of nowhere in a storm with papers she hadn't verified by wire. He was ex-military, that much she could tell from how he moved. And now he was tapping out private messages from her barn, without her knowledge. She didn't know who he was, but she was going to find out. By morning, the storm had broken, and the plains lay sodden under a gray, low-hanging ski sky. Dry Creek stirred slowly, its dusty heart dampened, but not stilled. Maribelle stood at the window of the telegraph office, watching townsfolk pick their way through puddles and mud. Dave was nowhere to be seen. She hadn't slept much. Her mind looped the coded message again and again. Package uncertain. Monitoring host. The words stuck like thorns. She needed answers. But for now, the line was operational, and work came first. Mid-morning, Dave returned from town with a bucket of nails and a quiet nod. Barn roof's half blown off, he said. Figured you had bigger things to fix. Maribelle eyed him cautiously but said nothing. She watched him hammer away for the better part of an hour from her window. Despite her suspicions, he moved with quiet competence, repairing more than the barn. He resecured a section of the telegraph office roof she'd been meaning to get to. Later, she stepped outside to hand him a cup of coffee. He took it with a grateful nod. You always work in silence, she asked. Dave smirked. Silence doesn't lie. She didn't laugh, but something in her chest tugged. Where were you posted before Cheyenne? He hesitated. North Platte, then Ogallala, routed through Julesburg. Maribelle frowned. That doesn't track. Cheyenne line runs south to Denver, not through Ogallala. Dave stiffened just slightly. Old habits, got my wires crossed. Before she could push further, a shadow fell across them. Morning, folks, came a smooth voice. Sheriff Landry, dressed as usual in his polished boots and neatly pressed vest, tipped his hat to Maribelle and threw a glance that lingered too long. Miss Knox, he said, looking lovely as ever. Maribelle stepped back instinctively. Sheriff. He turned to Dave, eyes narrowing slightly. And you must be the lineman from Cheyenne. Funny. Didn't hear about any maintenance runs this week. Must have missed the wire, Dave said calmly. Landry stepped closer. Thing is, I keep close tabs on comings and goings in this town. And a man showing up during a storm with no warning. That makes folks nervous. Only here to fix wires, Sheriff. Maybe. Or maybe you're running from something. Landry let the words hang, then tipped his hat again. Watch your back, stranger. He walked off, boots sloshing through mud. Maribelle sighed. He thinks he owns this town, she muttered. Doesn't he? Dave said, half joking, but there was steel beneath it. That afternoon, Miss Opal paid a visit with her usual false sweetness. She brought a tin of cornbread and a bucket of rumors. You hear the talk? She asked, eyes glinting. That stranger of yours, he's no lineman. Some say he's a bounty hunter. Heard he worked the Platte River line picking up fugitives for the marshal. Maribelle took the cornbread without comment. I'd be careful, dear, Opal said softly. Dry Creek's not kind to women with secrets. That night, Maribelle walked to the cemetery just outside town. The air smelled of wet pine and lichen. She knelt before the headstone marked Sheriff Thomas Knox. The grave was simple, clean, and still felt too fresh after all these months. They say it was outlaws, she whispered. But you never said their names. And no one ever found the ones who shot you. Just some burnt bodies and a badge. Her fingers traced the engraving. Beloved husband, protector, truth seeker. I never believed it. And now there's this man in my barn tapping out secrets. What were you involved in, Thomas? What did you die for? She stayed until the sun dipped low, then walked home heart heavier than when she'd left. That evening, Dave was patching the roof again, bare-armed sleeves rolled up, revealing a long scar along his forearm. Maribelle brought him a new oilskin she'd mended. He accepted it with quiet gratitude. You ever lose someone? She asked. He nodded. Brother. And a few friends. War doesn't leave room for farewells. They stood in silence for a moment, two strangers clinging to fragments of trust. Then she asked softly, Do you always carry a telegraph key with you? Dave looked at her, hard, but didn't lie. Yes. She nodded once. If you send anything again, you do it through my ears. Understood? He gave a slow nod. Understood. Later that night, after he'd gone to the barn, Maribelle returned to her desk. Something gnawed at her. She opened the drawer where he'd stowed his coat earlier. It was wrong, and she knew it. But so was the way her husband had died. Inside the coat pocket, folded and worn, was a wanted poster. Not for Dave, but for Thomas Knox. Her husband's face stared up at her. Beneath it, scrawled in red pencil, informant. Maribelle froze, her breath caught in her throat. The candlelight flickered. What had her husband been mixed up in? And who exactly was Dave Ramsey? The wind came back with a vengeance, ushering in another storm that rolled across the plains like a freight train of thunder and shadow. Maribelle shuttered the windows and lit a lantern, its golden glow fighting the gloom. The air inside the telegraph station crackled with tension, not from the static of the wires, but from the unspoken weight between her and Dave Ramsey. He sat across from her at the small kitchen table, still damp from the rain. His coat hung by the door, dripping onto the floor. She had not returned the wanted poster to his pocket. The kettle whistled. She poured them both tea, the steam swirling between them like ghosts. You met him, didn't you? She asked, voice steady. Dave didn't look up right away. Then he nodded slow. I did. She said nothing, letting the silence stretch until it begged to be filled. We crossed paths 2 years ago in Laramie. He came in with information on a land syndicate, funneling illegal claims through forged deeds. Said he wanted to protect Dry Creek from being swallowed up. She gripped her cup tighter. So he was an informant. He was brave, Dave said, but careless. Someone found out. Someone like you. He met her gaze then. I wasn't the one who sold him out. I came too late. By the time I reached the safe house, it was burning. There was a body inside. They said it was him. Maribelle stood and walked to the mantel. From a small wooden box, she retrieved a notebook, old leather-bound, worn from years of being handled in secret. This was his journal. I never told anyone about it, not even the sheriff. She handed it to Dave. He opened the cover, flipping past pages of scribbled observations, names, numbers, until he reached a set of symbols unlike anything else in the book. "Encrypted," he murmured. "Military-grade cipher. I've seen this before." He reached into his satchel and pulled out a folded paper from the night he arrived, the very message he'd sent, using the Barnes Morse key. He laid it beside the journal. The codes matched. Maribelle stared at the two papers, her heart hammering in her chest. "You used his code." Dave shook his head. "I used a code. I didn't know it was his until now. These are coordinates, safe houses, hidden stashes. It's part of something bigger." Before she could reply, the door burst open with a slam. Rain poured in for a heartbeat before a pair of boots stomped through. Sheriff Landry. Behind him, two deputies hovered like shadows. "Evening, Miss Knox," Landry said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I hope I'm not interrupting." Maribelle stepped protectively between him and Dave. "What do you want?" Landry held up a folded sheet of paper. "Telegram came through from Denver. Seems your guest here is wanted for impersonating a federal contractor. That makes him a fugitive." Dave stood calm but unreadable. That telegram wasn't from Denver. It was forged. Landry's grin widened. "Funny coming from a man with no badge and no proof of employment. You got 48 hours to leave town, Ramsey. After that, I arrest you on sight." He tipped his hat mockingly to Maribelle, then left with his men boots echoing on the wooden floor. When the door shut, Maribelle turned to Dave, eyes searching. "Is any of that true?" "Parts of it," he said, "but not the part that matters. I didn't come here to hurt you. Or your husband's name." She pressed a hand to her chest, the journal still clutched in her other hand. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "Because the truth makes enemies faster than lies." Lightning flared outside. The building groaned under the wind. Dave walked to the corner of the room and pulled up a loose floorboard with practiced ease. Beneath, wrapped in oilskin, were old dispatches marked in the same hand as the journal, Thomas Knox's handwriting. "He hid them here." Dave nodded. "This town isn't just a backwater, it's a choke point. If Landry and whoever he answers to gain control of it, they can reroute the telegraph lines, bury records, manipulate claims." Thomas tried to stop them. Maribelle swallowed and died for it. They sat beside the hidden cache in silence. The air between them thickened with grief, with doubt, with something unspoken. "When did you stop being a bounty hunter?" she asked. Dave looked at her for a long moment. "When I realized chasing men wasn't the same as chasing justice." Thunder rolled outside. The lantern flickered. Maribelle reached for the journal again, flipping to the codes. Her finger traced the symbols. "Then help me finish what he started." Dave nodded. "But you should know, if we do this, we make enemies. Real ones." She met his eyes, fierce and unwavering. "Then let them come." And beneath them the storm howled, as if the town itself had heard her challenge. The rain had passed, but the storm hadn't. Inside the telegraph station, the air hung heavy between Maribelle and Dave. The hidden dispatches and encoded journal lay spread out across the table like relics of a dead man's crusade. Maribelle stood by the window, arms crossed tight over her chest. Dave sat across from her, his hat resting on his knee, his eyes not meeting hers. "So," she said, voice like flint, "you're going to start telling me the truth now?" "All of it." Dave exhaled slowly. "I owe you that." She didn't nod, didn't speak, just waited. "I was a scout, worked for a branch of the Interior Department during the land grant boom. Our job was to investigate fraud. There were thousands of false deeds, fake homesteads, paperwork designed to push out real settlers and replace them with dummy claims tied to syndicates. Like the one my husband tried to stop," she said flatly. Dave looked up. "Yes. Thomas Knox came to us with evidence. He had ledgers, witness names, map overlays. Said someone in Dry Creek was routing documents through the church's land trust that it all tied back to Landry and his backers. Maribelle's hands gripped the windowsill. Why didn't he tell me? Because he knew they'd come for him. And he knew they might come for you. He kept you in the dark to keep you safe. She turned, eyes flaring. And you, what were you to him? Dave's voice lowered. I was his contact. We met in secret. He passed off documents. Told me about the pressure he was under, Landry threatening him, Tolliver tightening the noose. He was going to testify in Denver. But he never made it. She swallowed hard. The fire. The body. Dave shook his head. Too convenient. Too fast. I got there within the hour. No way to verify the corpse. No autopsy. No proper identification. Just ashes and assumption. She stared at him. You think he's still alive? I think someone wanted us to think he wasn't. The room was silent, save for the low crackle of the lantern. Then Maribelle moved toward the table, her voice low. Why didn't you tell me this when you arrived? Because I didn't know who you were anymore. I didn't know if I could trust you. She blinked. That hurt more than she expected. Dave stood slowly. He walked to the window, staring out at the muddy street. And then I saw how strong you were, how you kept this place running when they all wanted it to fall apart. And I knew if I stayed, I'd drag you down with me. So what now? She asked. Now I leave. Before they pin everything on me and make you guilty by proximity. She stepped forward. And what about the journal, the dispatches? You think they won't come after me anyway? He nodded, grim. They might. But if I'm gone, you have a chance to fight clean. Build your own case. I'll lead them away. Maribelle's throat tightened. She wasn't ready for him to go. Not yet. Not when the silence between them had finally turned into something else. Something almost tender. Dave moved toward the door, his steps slow. He took up his coat, hat, and satchel. When he turned back to face her, there was rain in his eyes, though the ski outside hadn't yet opened. I never meant to put this on you, he said quietly. But I won't be the reason you lose anything more. He opened the door. Rain had begun again. A soft drizzle. He stepped out into it. She followed him onto the porch, her hands trembling at her sides. He paused at the edge of the steps. Then, like a man turning himself into fate, Dave turned back. Rain streaked across his face, the brim of his hat sagging low. In the half-light, with the glow of the lantern behind her and the gloom of the storm ahead of him, he looked like something from another life. He took one breath, then whispered, I'd trade 10 herds for one night with you. His voice cracked rough with rain and regret. Not for your body. For your time. Your eyes. Your forgiveness. For the chance to sit beside you in the quiet and forget the world hates men like me. Maribelle didn't move. Couldn't. His words carved through the night like thunder. Not poetic. Not rehearsed. Just raw. He looked at her one last time, then turned and walked into the storm. She stood frozen on the porch, wind catching the edges of her shawl. Her heart raced in the hollow of her chest, beating too hard for someone who had just been left. But the echo of his words didn't leave her. Not that night. Not for a long, long time. The storm had passed. Again. But Maribelle knew storms didn't just live in clouds. They lived in men's hearts, in secrets buried beneath polite smiles and Sunday sermons, in the echo of firelight on her walls, in the way Thomas never got to say goodbye. She sat alone in the telegraph station, her hands trembling slightly over the brass key. Dave was gone. Out there somewhere. And time was running out. In front of her, open on the desk, lay Thomas's journal. The cipher glared up at her like an accusation. But now she understood it thanks to Dave. Coordinates, code words, timing, and tucked between 2 pages, a separate slip of paper. One line scratched in her husband's hand. If they take me, send this to Denver. Use the code. Trust no one in Dry Creek. So she did. Each tap of the key echoed in her bones. Her fingers trembled with every stroke, as if Thomas's voice were writing each pulse of the wire, guiding her hand one last time. The cipher translated through her fingers line by line into a message that would pierce the lie cloaking her husband's death. Conspiracy confirmed. Land theft. Church laundering. Sheriff complicit. Files enclosed. Signed TTK. When she finished, she slid the dispatch into the line and exhaled like she'd been holding her breath for months. Just then she heard it. A creak. A whisper of fabric. She turned startled and found Miss Opal standing in the doorway. Not with cookies, not with gossip, but with a lantern. Lit. And a jug of kerosene. You should have kept your pretty little head out of it, dear. Opal said, her voice no longer sweet. Maribelle stood slowly. You're working for Landry. For the men who pay him, actually. And you just signed your death warrant. Opal splashed the kerosene across the floor. The scent struck Maribelle like a slap. The match hissed to life. But before it struck the oil, a boot kicked in the side door. Dave Ramsey. He didn't speak, just tackled Opal like a bolt of thunder. The lantern shattered. Flames caught the edge of a curtain. Maribelle grabbed the fire bucket and doused the wall. Dave held Opal down with one knee until she stopped struggling. I knew she was watching you, he said, breathing hard, but I didn't think she'd go this far. Why are you here? Maribelle gasped. Dave looked at her, rainwater still dripping from his hat. Because you stayed, because you fought, because I couldn't leave you alone. Before she could speak, a whistle rang out in the street. Voice. Boots if Landry had come. He strode in, flanked by two deputies, pistol already drawn. Hands off the woman, Ramsey. You're under arrest. Arson, impersonation, conspiracy. Maribelle stepped between them. She tried to burn the station down. She's the one. Landry barely glanced at the mess. Miss Knox, you've been under a lot of stress. It's understandable you'd confuse events. Don't gaslight her, Dave growled. You've been covering this up from the start. Landry leveled the gun. You want to die like her husband? Keep talking. A silence fell. And then behind Landry, another voice. Drop the weapon, Sheriff. The voice rang out clear, cold, and unmistakably federal, cutting through the tension like a rifle shot. Even the deputies froze. It wasn't a Dry Creek voice. A tall man in a dust-colored coat stepped through the doorway, badge glinting. Special Agent Silas Monroe, U.S. Marshal's Office. We received a wire from this station last night. Very compelling reading. Landry hesitated. Two more agents appeared behind Monroe. Armed. Steady. The sheriff let his pistol fall. It clattered to the floor. Monroe turned to Maribelle. You sent the wire. She nodded. My husband kept records. Dave helped me decode them. Monroe looked to Dave, a slow smile. You held the line. We got your signal, Ramsey, back when you first tapped the code. Night of the storm. We traced it, but needed a second confirmation. Miss Knox gave us that. Maribelle blinked. You sent that message. That first night. Dave nodded. I wasn't sure I could trust anyone yet. Not even you. So I called for backup. Landry snarled. This is my town. You think people will believe some drifter and a grieving widow over? Monroe cut him off. We already have. He motioned to his men. Take them. Landry, Tolliver, and her, he added, nodding toward Opal, now being dragged up by her elbows. Tolliver appeared moments later, trying to flee the church steps. He didn't make it far. In the aftermath, Maribelle stood beside the telegraph station's cracked doorway. Smoke clung to the eaves. Dave stepped up beside her. Quiet. He really did die for something, didn't he? She asked. Dave nodded. And now maybe, He won't have to be the only one. She looked at him, and something that had lived in her heart for too long, grief, doubt, rage, finally loosened. "What now?" she asked. "Now," Dave said softly, "we fix what he started. Together." She smiled just barely. But it was real. And in the silence between them, the telegraph wires hummed again. A voice on the line, a story rewritten, an ending earned. It was spring again, the kind that painted the Colorado hills in tender green and stirred the cottonwoods into restless whispers. Months had passed since the storm, since the secrets, since the guns were holstered and justice came down like Judgment Day. Dry Creek had changed. So had Dave Ramsey. He wasn't a stranger anymore, no longer a bounty hunter, a scout, or some drifting shadow clinging to the edge of someone else's tale. He belonged now, not to the wilderness, but to something steady, something earned. He was just a man rebuilding a telegraph station, nail by nail, beam by beam, and sometimes when she wasn't looking, gaze by gaze. Maribelle watched from the porch, a tin of lemonade in one hand, eyes half-lidded with something softer than caution. She didn't say much as he worked. Neither did he. But the quiet between them wasn't empty anymore. It was shared. The new station looked stronger, a little taller. There were extra windows angled to catch both sunrise and sunset. Dave had carved her initials into the new banister. She hadn't mentioned it. Not yet. But once, as she passed her fingers over the carving, a smile ghosted across her lips, small, private, and full of things unspoken. The townsfolk passed by with nods and smiles now. No more whispers. Landry, Opal, and Tolliver were long gone, taken east to face trial. Dry Creek had finally exhaled. And still Dave stayed. He didn't say why, not with words. But every morning there he was. Every evening he stayed just long enough. Until one night, he didn't leave. Another storm came that evening. Not wild like the first. Just a steady curtain of rain tapping against the roof, like a heartbeat out of rhythm. Maribelle stepped out onto the porch, a blanket draped over her shoulders. Dave was already there, seated on the steps, legs stretched out, hat off. He held a mug of coffee like it was an anchor. She sat beside him. For a while they just listened. The rain, the creak of wood settling, the faint, steady click of the telegraph key from inside, sending nothing urgent. Just a ping, a hello, a sign of life, soft and rhythmic, like a whisper through wire, reminding them that even from loss, something steady could still speak back. A quiet proof that healing had begun. Finally, she spoke. "You know," she said, voice soft as the rain. "You could go now. You've done your part. You don't owe me anything." Dave turned his head, brows drawn slightly. "I don't owe you, but maybe I owe myself." She smiled faintly. "That sounds suspiciously like hope." He chuckled. "Don't spread that rumor. I've got a reputation." A gust of wind sent the scent of wet earth curling around them. Maribelle pulled the blanket tighter, then leaned slightly, shoulder brushing his. She spoke again, slower this time. "You once said you'd trade 10 herds for one night with me." Dave swallowed. "I remember." She turned, looking directly at him. Her eyes no longer guarded, no longer dimmed by grief or anger. "Well," she whispered, "you can have all my nights now." The words settled into the space between them, like dew on morning grass. Dave didn't answer right away. He didn't need to. He reached for her hand, calloused and small inside his. She didn't pull away. Inside, the telegraph key clicked again. Tap, tap, tap. A lullaby of metal and wire, a rhythm like a heartbeat. Rain fell gently around them, but neither moved. The storm for once stayed outside. No flicker of lightning behind their eyes, no thunder in their chests. Only calm, only warmth, like the world had finally taken a breath and let it out slow. And in that hush where lightning no longer threatened and thunder held its tongue, love bloomed again, slow and certain, like wildflowers pushing through scorched earth. Not loudly, not wildly, but surely. The kind of love that rises from ashes like theirs, forged in the heat of betrayal, and lit anew after the fire that nearly took everything. A love that remembers the blaze, but chooses to grow beyond it. The kind that doesn't ask for permission. The kind that stays forever. Some whispers don't need answers. Some rainy nights can't wash away what's been lost. But in Dry Creek, that spring, a drifter with a tattered past and a widow still haunted by love found something neither thought they deserved: forgiveness. And love, not loud or easy, but steady, like the hum of a telegraph wire cutting through the dark. I don't know if Maribelle and Dave lived happily ever after, but I believe in the moment he walked away and she didn't stop him. They chose each other. In the quiet way only the West understands.